Maki looked at the clock. It was already 8 p.m. and Jack still hadn't come home. It wasn't the first time he was late, but today was special, their daughter Kirby's 10th birthday. They had barely spoken lately, and it seemed like there was nothing in common between the couple anymore. They stayed together mainly for Kirby's sake, so she wouldn't notice that something was wrong. The party guests had already left, but Kirby kept asking why her father wasn't there. She wanted him to be there to congratulate her. The day had been almost perfect, but without Jack there, something essential was missing for Kirby to be truly happy. Everything had changed since Jack's promotion. Before, he was an ordinary manager, complaining a lot about his boss and his work, but he was always home on time. One day, he came home beaming, saying that his prayers had been answered, he had been promoted. That's when everything started to fall apart. With his new position, Jack started to spend more time at work, arriving later and later. Maki, sitting at the kitchen table, had already cleaned up. Kirby, even though it was her birthday, had already done her homework. The two were watching TV, but Maki's heart was heavy. She held the phone in the hope that Jack would call, but the call never came. Kirby, disappointed, went to bed without hearing the words she had been waiting for from her father. Later that night, Jack arrived silently. When he saw the untouched birthday cake on the table, he realized that he had missed the celebration. Maki appeared in the kitchen, watching him with eyes that asked for explanations. "Where have you been? Kirby waited for you all night. I can't stand this excuse that you're always at work anymore." "You're exaggerating, Maki," Jack replied, visibly irritated. "I'm tired of your jealousy." "It's not jealousy, Jack. You're hiding something from me. How do you explain the lipstick I found in your car?" "Oh, that?" Jack tried to justify himself. "A friend took my car during lunch." "It doesn't mean anything. You're making up anything just to avoid admitting the truth." Maki couldn't hold back her tears any longer, but Jack didn't say anything. He just turned around and went to his room, leaving her alone in the kitchen, where she cried in silence for a long time. Their relationship was so strained that she couldn't even remember the last time they had had a sincere conversation. After being alone in the kitchen for almost an hour, Maki finally went to her room, making sure that Jack was already asleep before going to bed. The next day, while Kirby was still sleeping, Maki went into her daughter's room and placed on the table the present that was supposedly from Jack, but that she had bought herself, as she always did. Kirby woke up, saw the present and was happy, believing that her father had remembered her birthday. After expressing all her happiness to her mother, they began to prepare for another day. Maki went to the travel agency where she worked, and Kirby went to school. Maki sold package tours every day, even though she hadn't been on vacation herself in years. The last time she had seen the ocean, she was still a child. She always dreamed of taking a family vacation, but it never happened, because Jack never bothered to adjust his days off to coincide with hers. He always said it was a waste of money. Maki, however, often thought about traveling alone with her daughter. Her workday passed quickly as she excitedly talked about exotic destinations to her clients. At the end of the day, Maki picked Kirby up from school, and they drove home together. On the way, she couldn't stop thinking, something had to change between her and Jack, or things would fall apart for good. 15 years ago, everything was different. Maki and Jack met when they were still students. She was in her second year of college, and he was already finishing his degree. It all started at a student party. That night, Jack engaged her in a long conversation, and Maki was enchanted by his ability to talk about anything. The night flew by, and when the party was over, he offered to walk her home. They walked through the night city, talking about dreams and plans for the future. Jack talked about how he would soon have a good job, earn a lot of money and start a big family. At that moment, he seemed sincere, and she believed him. However, after that night, Jack disappeared for weeks, without even asking for her number. Maki spent days thinking about him, wondering where he was. Maki never imagined that she would meet Jack again after that student party. In fact, she thought that that meeting had been the last. But fate brought them together again, in an unexpected way. They crossed paths by chance in a store, and this time, Jack didn't let the opportunity slip away. He quickly asked for her number and promised an outing as fun as the one at the party. Maki didn't have high expectations. After all, he had disappeared for weeks after their first date. But surprisingly, just a few days later, Jack asked her out. They began spending a lot of time together, enjoying weekends and conversations that seemed to never end. Maki soon realized that she was falling in love, but she feared that her feelings would not be reciprocated. However, Jack surprised her once again by confessing his love for her. It wasn't long before they were married. The first few years of their marriage were perfect. They lived in a small rented apartment, and although Jack worked hard to improve their lives, they understood each other perfectly. When Kirby was born, life seemed complete. Jack adored his daughter, and for a while, everything was fine, until financial problems began to appear. To solve the situation, Jack got a job at a large company, where he eventually became the head of a department. Maki remembered well how he used to come home complaining about his boss, saying that he didn't know how to deal with people. Ironically, after being promoted, Jack began to act in a similar way to the boss he had criticized so much. That night, Maki noticed something was different. Jack hadn't come home yet when she and Kirby finished dinner and tidied up the kitchen. The nights were becoming increasingly lonely for them, but that night, something unexpected happened. Jack finally arrived, in a good mood, as if nothing could ruin his mood. Without saying a word, he went straight to the bedroom and started going through his things. "Where have you been?" Maki asked, trying not to sound worried. "I'm leaving," Jack replied with disturbing calmness. "What? What do you mean? Do you want to live apart?" Maki could barely process what was happening. Jack, without looking at her, continued to rummage through the room looking for something. "Sure, we'll split up. And I'll keep the apartment, after all, it's my parents'," he said without hesitation. Maki watched her husband in shock, unable to believe what she was hearing. "What are you looking for?" she asked, trying to find an explanation. "My passport," he replied. "What do you need the passport for?" Maki insisted, beginning to feel desperation taking over. "I'm leaving, Maki. I'm in love with someone else and I want a divorce," Jack said coldly. Maki's world fell apart at that moment. She stood there, staring at the man who had sworn to love her, unable to believe that this was really happening. "This is a joke, right? You're joking, please tell me you're joking," she begged, hoping he would deny everything. "No, Maki, it's not a joke. We've become strangers," he said, as if he had already decided everything. Maki tried to argue, but deep down, she knew that the marriage was already lost. They continued arguing for a long time, but Jack's words were a blow from which she knew she would not recover easily. When Jack finished packing, he left without looking back, slamming the door shut. Maki, in disbelief, slid to the floor, feeling the weight of the goodbye. She couldn't believe that her husband had left without even saying goodbye to their daughter. Sitting in the hallway, Maki cried silently, reflecting on what had happened. The next morning, Kirby bombarded her with questions, wanting to know where her father was. Maki, not knowing how to tell her the truth, simply said that he had gone on a business trip. However, as the days passed, Jack's business trip continued to drag on, and Kirby began to suspect that her mother was hiding something. 2 weeks later, Jack still hadn't called. Maki, realizing that he wasn't coming back, decided it was time to tell her daughter the truth. It was evening, and the two of them were sitting at the table. "Daughter, I need to tell you something." Maki began, trying to find the right words. "It's about Dad, isn't it?" Kirby asked seriously. He fell in love with someone else, didn't he? And now he's living with her. Maki was surprised. Kirby, with unexpected maturity, had already realized what was happening. Yes, honey. I didn't want to tell you this way, but it's true. He's gone, and he's not coming back. I suspected it, Mom, Kirby replied calmly. It's similar to what happened with my friend's parents. But don't worry, I'm old enough to understand that he made his own decision. Maki looked at her daughter sadly, realizing how much Kirby had matured without her noticing. You're surprising me, my daughter. I feel like I don't even know you anymore. Kirby smiled and hugged her mother, understanding how hard this was for her. Only a month later, Maki received a court summons. Jack had filed for divorce. Although Kirby stayed with Maki, Jack paid child support on time, but he rarely showed up to see his daughter. Sometimes he called, but the conversations never lasted as long as Kirby would have liked. The days without Jack passed slowly. Maki, deep down, still hoped he would come back. At times, she even found herself willing to forgive him, but nothing changed. To make matters worse, she saw photos of Jack with his new girlfriend on social media, which made her angry and, at the same time, painfully homesick. One day, as she was leaving work and waiting for the bus, Maki noticed that the bus was taking longer than usual. Lost in her thoughts, she barely noticed when a black car pulled up next to her. The window rolled down, and a man called out to her. "Maki, do you want a ride?" said Clark, Jack's boss. She turned and recognized him from some company events, but hesitated. "Clark? Oh, no. No need, it's okay. Don't be shy, Maki. Get in, I'll take you home," Clark insisted, with a friendly smile. Maki, still reluctant, ended up accepting the offer. We didn't argue any further, and soon Maki was sitting in the front seat of a luxury car. "Where should I take you?" Clark asked, and she quickly dictated the address. The whole way there, he talked about work and complimented Jack, mentioning the great job he was doing in his new position. Maki listened in silence, until Clark asked a question she hadn't expected. "Excuse me, but why doesn't Jack ever talk about you? Are you guys okay?" She took a deep breath before answering, "We got divorced a month ago. He found someone else." Clark was shocked. "That's strange, I've never heard anything about that." After that, the trip went on in silence. Clark had always seen Jack as an exemplary family man, so finding out these details was a shock. Clark dropped her off at home, and Maki went back to her routine. At Jack's work, no one knew about the divorce, and it surprised her. Maki's life seemed to be getting worse since Jack left. Before, she used to criticize him for not helping around the house, but now she missed his helping hands to solve problems. The cabinet door broke, the lock started to loosen, and even the kitchen faucet malfunctioned. It was as if all the problems had decided to appear all at once. One day at work, Maki made a decision. She and Kirby were going to take a vacation, something they hadn't done in a long time. When she got home, she told her daughter the news. "Kirby, get ready, we're going to Mexico." "Really? But I'm in school, Mom," Kirby replied. "Don't worry about it. We'll talk to the teachers so they can send the assignments by email. This will be our vacation." Kirby was overjoyed. "This is going to be amazing. It doesn't matter if Dad isn't going with us, he can rest with his new girlfriend. We'll have fun without him." Maki smiled. She knew that Kirby was happy with the idea. After so long dreaming of taking a vacation together, they were finally going to make their dream come true. The two of them flew to Mexico, and as soon as they arrived at the hotel, in a few minutes, they were already enjoying the beach. "Mom, it's so beautiful here. Why didn't we come sooner? Your father never had time, dear, but now we can do whatever we want." "Thank you, Mom. This is the best vacation of my life. And it will always be like this, daughter. We won't depend on anyone. We'll do what we like." Maki's words filled Kirby with hope. The trip was the best they had had in 5 years. During their time there, Maki met an interesting man named Barry, who was also from the same city and country as them. They spent a lot of time together, but it wasn't a holiday romance. They just enjoyed each other's company, exchanged numbers and promised to keep in touch when they got back. They swam in the sea, went to clubs and went on excursions. The weeks flew by, and Kirby was happier than she had been in a long time. She really didn't want to go home, but school and her cat were waiting for her. Her neighbor was taking care of everything while she was away. Back from the sea, tanned and rested, Maki finally realized that it was time to start a new life. She returned home happy and at peace, and for the first time, she stopped thinking about her ex-husband. It seemed that her daughter had changed too, because she no longer waited for her father. Sometimes, Maki would still check his social media profile and be happy that he was doing well with his new girlfriend. However, instead of envy, she felt compassion for the girl, who was 15 years younger than her. Maki knew that in a few years, Jack would probably be with someone else. After all, she was sure that his new girlfriend was only interested in him because, after the divorce, he started earning well. Maki, on the other hand, moved on and started going out with Clark. He would often take her home after work. Clark was 5 years older than her, divorced a few times, and Maki noticed that he showed interest in her. Even so, she didn't take it too seriously, because she knew that Clark had a certain reputation for changing partners frequently, something that Jack himself had mentioned. Over time, Kirby also began to live her own life, always involved in school and happy to spend the weekends at her grandparents' house. She loved these visits, which came with less supervision, and Maki was happy to see her so cheerful. One day, Maki received a text from a friend inviting her to a weekend at the country house. She thought about it for a while and decided that she needed to get out of her funk. Maybe this trip would cheer her up. She packed her bags quickly and was in the car within an hour. "Let's relax a little," asked Molly, her friend. "Yes, we are. Who else is going?" Maki wanted to know. "Some people from my work, from my husband's work, and our mutual friends," Molly replied. The weekend at the country house promised to be unforgettable, but Maki was surprised when she got there. Clark was also there. "What are you doing here?" she asked, surprised. "Austin invited me," he replied, referring to Molly's husband. Maki then realized that Clark and Austin were longtime friends. That evening, they had a barbecue and talked a lot. Maki spent a lot of time with Clark, and felt that he was also trying to get closer to her. But, not missing the opportunity, she asked, "How is Jack?" "He's doing well at work, but to be honest, I think he's thinking about leaving. It seems like he's not as excited about it all anymore," Clark replied. Maki was thoughtful. Deep down, she still had hope that Jack's life wasn't as good as it seemed. As the music played in the background, she secretly hoped that his relationship with his new girlfriend wouldn't work out. Now he finally understood that without money, he was just an ordinary, older man. But even so, she wasn't sure what she really expected. Maybe he imagined that the young woman would run back to him, regretful. Maki also thought about this, especially after that weekend at the country house. On Sunday night, when she returned to the city, she went to her parents' house to pick up her daughter. She didn't visit them often, because whenever she did, she ended up listening to her mother lecture her on how she should live. When she arrived, she knocked on the door, and her mother greeted her happily. "Hi, Mommy." Maki kissed her mother and came in. "Where is my daughter?" "Did you do your homework?" she asked. "Yes, you did, now you're watching TV." Maki entered the living room and found the girl watching cartoons. "Daughter, let's get ready, it's time to go home." The girl protested, asking to stay with her grandmother a little longer. Maki insisted, and her daughter, with a look of discontent, got up to pack her backpack. She knew that going home meant boredom, but she obeyed. Meanwhile, Maki always tried to find out how her daughter's life was going. "Tell me, daughter, how is your life at school with your friends?" she asked. "Mom, I like going to school and almost all my friends are really cool." And then the girl said, "Mom, my dad Jack was even thinking about getting married again." This surprised her. She didn't expect her ex-husband to go that far. "How do you know that?" she asked curiously. "I heard it from his mother-in-law," her daughter replied, and Maki limited herself to saying that she could only wish him happiness, although deep down she still felt something. "Be honest, you still like Jack, don't you?" her daughter insisted. "No, honey, seriously, it's something personal and I don't want to talk about it." Later, back home, Maki couldn't believe that Jack was planning to get married again, especially to that woman. She threw herself on the bed and the tears came. She knew that this was the end for good. The next day, when she returned to work, she found a wedding invitation in her mailbox. Her ex-husband had invited her to the wedding, something that left her in disbelief. That night, she vented to a friend on the phone. "Has he lost his mind? Inviting me to the wedding? What do I do about that?" "Don't go," her friend suggested. "Or he'll think you're jealous and can't move on," she warned. "But I really don't want to go," Maki replied. Irritated. "Then find someone to go with you, just to show that you've moved on too," her friend said in a provocative tone. "But where am I going to find someone like that?" Maki thought out loud. "What if Clark goes with you? Remember what you talked about at the country house? Are you crazy? He's my ex-husband's boss," Maki protested. "Exactly. This will show Jack that you're with someone too. Trust me, it'll work out. Besides, you need a beautiful dress for this wedding," her friend insisted, already making plans. Maki still thought the idea was absurd. "Just imagine, asking Clark to accompany me to my ex's wedding. I don't know if I can do that. It's easier than you think. And who knows, maybe things won't work out in a way you never expected," her friend concluded. Maki decided that she would accept new possibilities, even if she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Her friend's words made her laugh, and the next day, she finally plucked up the courage to call Clark. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop to talk, and Clark was happy to accept. That night, sitting at a table by the window, Clark seemed a little confused. "I don't know how to ask this, but, well, Jack is getting married soon and he invited me. Would you like to go with me?" Maki was surprised, but she didn't have to insist much for him to agree to go with her. For her, it was almost unbelievable to hear that. It was 12 weeks before the wedding, and Maki decided that she needed to find the perfect dress. Over the weekend, they went shopping, but couldn't find anything that stood out. Then Maki had an idea: why don't we go to a bridal shop? They usually have dresses for other occasions too. It was a great suggestion. At the bridal boutique, Maki couldn't take her eyes off herself in the mirror. She looked beautiful and she was sure that no one would wear a better dress that day. When the long-awaited moment finally arrived, Maki woke up early, determined to impress her ex-husband. At 9 a.m., the makeup artist arrived at her house to do her hair and makeup. When Maki looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. After getting ready and talking to Clark on the phone, she went out to meet him at the front door. "You look stunning, Maki," he said, and she smiled happily. After stopping by a florist to buy a beautiful bouquet, Maki was nervous. It was crucial that everything came out perfect and that her ex-husband didn't find any flaws. When they arrived at the registry office, Jack's jaw dropped when he saw them. He quickly walked over to greet them, not understanding how Maki and Clark were together. "How did you two meet?" Jack asked, looking at Maki, who was more beautiful than ever. He looked at her carefully, not understanding why he had never noticed her beauty before. "We're going out," Clark replied, without thinking much. Jack blushed and several questions popped into his mind. He couldn't understand how his boss could be with Maki. Throughout the celebration, Clark couldn't take his eyes off the happy couple, who whispered and smiled at each other. "It looks like we're making a great couple," Clark commented. Maki smiled, but she wasn't so sure that their relationship was that perfect. After the wedding, she called a taxi and went home, while Clark followed in his car. Alone at home, Maki realized that she had forgotten to thank Clark for his help. "Sorry, if you need anything in the future, just call me," he said, his voice sounding sad. "Is everything okay? You seem a little distant," Maki commented. "I just thought we could have something together, but you made it clear that we're not on that path," Clark replied. That confused her. "I didn't know that was important to you," she said. "Forget it," Clark replied, and hung up. Maki went to sleep, and from that day on, they never spoke again. Maki suddenly realized that she was missing Clark. She missed his company, their nightly walks, and their phone conversations. However, she didn't feel comfortable calling her mother, who had told her about Clark's disdain for Jack at work. Now, Jack was having trouble in his family, since his young wife was seeing someone else. Maki was confused, not knowing whether to be happy or sad. It seemed that if Jack came back, maybe she could forgive him. One night, Jack showed up with his daughter, saying that he just wanted to see her. Maki was surprised by his sudden desire to reconnect after so long. He started talking about saving the family, and those were exactly the words she wanted to hear. But now, her thoughts were with Clark. "Hi, if you're here, you can stay with our daughter for a while. I urgently need to sit down to talk about something important," Jack said, looking perplexed. Maki quickly put on a jacket, got in a taxi and decided to go see Clark. During the ride, she thought about how Clark might not let her in, since he had made it clear that he didn't want that kind of connection. Anxiety consumed her, and she feared being rejected. When she arrived, she knocked on the door nervously. When Clark opened it, she threw herself into his arms. "I'm sorry, I thought about it a lot and realized that you were right, we were a good match. Please give me another chance," she begged. Clark was stunned by her sudden declaration. He looked at her carefully, not knowing what to say. "You still love Jack, don't you? But I want a new relationship too. I want to be happy with you. You taught me to forgive myself and to be strong when everything seems difficult. I never thought I could love you like this," Maki confessed. "The days without speaking to you were unbearable. It was good to hear that, but the situation at home was complicated. Jack was with our daughter, and I didn't understand why he had told me that he had been hasty and that there was still a chance to save everything. Before, I had expected to hear those words, but now I realize that they were unnecessary. We stayed in the hallway for a long time, hugging each other, kissing, and then we went home together, leaving Jack behind. I was in a state of confusion. I went to see my boss, who was surprised to see me. 'What are you doing here?' 'My relationship with my wife is improving,' he said. 'You're confusing things. Your wife is waiting for you at home. So you better go,' he insisted. Jack was furious and slammed the door hard before leaving. There was no point in staying there, it bothered him to see his wife and his boss so happy. He thought that after the divorce with Maki, he would never find anyone and would be unhappy forever. But things had changed a lot. A year later, Maki and Clark were married, and Maki was expecting their second child. Clark had raised Kirby as his own, and honestly, Mag never doubted that. She remembered her life with Jack perfectly and wondered where his head was at that time. Recently, Jack had divorced his young wife, moved to another country with his mistress, and had distanced himself from everything. He was drowning in problems and had left Clark's company, working elsewhere for a while, but it didn't last. His life was falling apart, and if he didn't take care of himself, it could end very badly. It seems that Jack didn't realize this. He doesn't even try to reconnect with his daughter. He doesn't care about her birthday, and Kirby doesn't care. To her, Clark is her father, who does everything he can to make her happy. One morning, Maki was preparing breakfast for the family, who had already settled down. Clark blessed his wife and rubbed her belly. Kirby arrived, and they all sat down at the table. They began to discuss how to spend the weekend. "I think we should go to Mom's country house. We need some fresh air," Clark suggested. "But I don't want to go out with my friends, Dad. They're adults, but you need to understand that family is more important," Kirby replied. "Just a moment, let's stop this. I'm about to give birth," Maki interrupted, getting up from her chair and feeling the contractions. "Call an ambulance. I'm giving birth." Leave your comment here if you liked the story. Have you also experienced an unhappy marriage? Subscribe to our channel for more stories of love and overcoming. A big hug.